The arrow had grazed her shoulder 3 miles back, and Clara Ashford could feel the blood cooling against her skin, turning tacky in the winter air. She pressed her palm against the wound as she ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized into small clouds before her face. The blood-stained gown, her wedding gown, she realized with a distant horror that felt like it belonged to someone else, caught on brambles and low branches, tearing silk that had cost more than most families earned in a year. Behind her, the howls rose again. Closer now. Keep moving. For the baby. Keep moving. Her wolf, that constant presence that had been her companion since her first shift at 13, had gone silent 3 hours ago when Marcus's blood had sprayed across her face. When she'd watched her brother's claws tear through her mate's throat, while Owen smiled that terrible smile she'd known since childhood. The smile that said he'd won again, that she'd never been anything but a piece on his board. The forest floor was treacherous with early snow and hidden roots. Clara's feet, still in the delicate slippers she'd worn for the ceremony, were numb. She couldn't feel her toes anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the burning in her lungs and the desperate animal need to survive. 3 months. The healer had confirmed it just that morning, pressing gentle hands to Clara's still flat belly while Marcus beamed like the sun had risen just for him. 3 months pregnant with the Ashford heir, the legitimate heir, the child who would have united two fractured bloodlines and brought peace to the Northern Territories. Owen had known. He'd known, and he'd chosen the wedding celebration to strike when the guards were drunk on wine and goodwill, when Marcus's attention was on his bride rather than his treacherous brother-in-law. "I did warn you," Owen had said, standing over Marcus's body while their father's blood still stained the great hall's stones. Their father, who had tried to stop it. Their father, who had died with surprise still frozen on his face. "I told you when we were children, Clara. Everything you love I take. It's simply how things are." She'd run. There had been no other choice. Owen's hunters were already fanning out through the castle, and the loyal guards were dead or dying. She'd grab the knife from Marcus's belt, still warm with his body heat, and she'd run into the night with her brother's laughter echoing behind her. Now the Ashford crest burned against her chest like a brand. The silver wolf snarling over a crescent moon, pinned to her bodice because tradition demanded the bride display her house's colors even as she joined another. The crest marked her as surely as a target painted on her back, but it also marks the child. The thought surfaced through the panic. The legitimate heir to Ashford. That's why he needs me dead. Another howl split the air and Clara's legs buckled. She caught herself on a birch tree, her bloody palm leaving a smear against the white bark. The wound in her shoulder had reopened. She could feel fresh warmth sliding down her arm, and with it, her strength was draining away. The trees were thinning. She could see moonlight ahead, a clearing or a field. Somewhere the hunters could easily surround her, but there was nowhere else to go. Behind her lay death. Before her lay. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She knew these woods. She'd studied the maps during the endless war councils her father had dragged her to, insisting she learn the lay of the land even though Owen would inherit. These trees, this terrain, she was approaching the border of Ironhold territory. Enemy territory, the kingdom of the Alpha King who had killed her father on the battlefield. The wolf whose name was spoken in whispers throughout the northern packs, whose armies had pushed the Ashford forces back time and again before the uneasy truce 5 years ago. Wulfric Ironhold, the butcher of Blackmoor. The king with gray eyes and a heart of iron. Clara laughed, and the sound that escaped her cracked throat was more sob than humor. She was running from certain death into probable death. From a brother who wanted her blood to an enemy who had every right to spill it. But probable was better than certain. And even monsters might hesitate to kill a pregnant woman. Please, she thought, though she wasn't sure who she was praying to. The moon goddess had never seemed particularly interested in Clara's fate. Please, if not for me, then for the baby. Marcus's baby. The only thing I have left of him. She pushed off from the tree and stumbled forward into the clearing. The moonlight was blinding after the darkness of the forest, reflecting off the snow with painful intensity. Clara squinted against it, her vision swimming, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The border marker stood at the center of the clearing, a massive standing stone carved with the Ironhold insignia, a crowned wolf wreathed in iron thorns. Beyond it, the trees were different. Older, darker. Territory that had never known Ashford rule. Behind her, the hunters burst from the tree line. There were 5 of them, shifted into their wolf forms, Owen's personal guard. They fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off her retreat, their eyes gleaming with the particular hunger of predators who knew their prey was cornered. The largest of them, Brennan, she recognized, Owen's right hand, let out a low growl of satisfaction. Clara's fingers found the knife at her waist. Marcus's knife. It felt like holding his hand one last time. "My brother wants my head," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "But he won't get it while I'm still breathing." She didn't wait for them to advance. Turning, she ran for the border stone, threw herself past it, and collapsed into Ironhold snow. The cold was immediate and absolute, seeping through her ruined gown like water through paper. She could hear the hunters behind her, hesitating at the border. Even Owen's wolves weren't foolish enough to cross into enemy territory without orders. But they would. Any moment now, they would decide she was worth the risk. Clara tried to push herself up. Her arms wouldn't cooperate. The blood loss, the exhaustion, the cold. Her body had finally reached its limit. Get up. Get up. Her wolf stirred then, for the first time since Marcus's death. Not with strength or hope, but with a strange, distant recognition. Something was coming. Something that made the animal part of her go very, very still. The last thing Clara saw before darkness claimed her was a pair of boots stepping into her field of vision. Not the hunter's boots. These were different. Fine black leather, worn with use, belonging to someone who walked like they owned the very ground beneath them. "Well," said a voice like winter itself, deep and cold and utterly devoid of mercy. "What do we have here?" The Ashford crest on her chest caught the moonlight, silver gleaming against blood-soaked silk. Then there was only darkness and the strange, impossible sensation of warmth. Clara woke to firelight and the scent of pine. For a long, disoriented moment, she thought she was home. That the nightmare of blood and betrayal had been nothing more than a fever dream, that she would open her eyes and find Marcus beside her, his hand resting protectively over her belly as it had every night since they'd learned about the baby. Then pain lanced through her shoulder, sharp and immediate, and memory crashed back with brutal clarity. Marcus is dead. Owen killed him. I ran. She kept her breathing slow and even, the way her father had taught her when she was young. Assess before you act. Information is survival. The sheets beneath her were silk, impossibly soft against her battered skin. The room was warm, heated by a fire that crackled somewhere to her left. She could smell herbs, healing salves, she recognized, and beneath that, something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. Pine and winter frost and something darker, wilder. The scent of a predator. Clara opened her eyes. The room was large and elegant, furnished in deep grays and blacks with silver accents that caught the firelight. Rich tapestries covered the stone walls, depicting wolves running through snow-covered forests. An Ironhold banner hung above the massive fireplace, the crowned wolf seeming to watch her with embroidered eyes. And in a chair by the fire, watching her with real ones, sat the most dangerous wolf alive. Wulfric Ironhold was not what she had expected. The stories painted him as a monster, a beast barely contained in human skin. Clara had imagined someone brutish, scarred, radiating violence like heat from a forge. Instead, she found a man of perhaps 30 winters, with a face that might have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and aristocratic planes. His hair was black as a raven's wing, swept back from a high forehead, and his shoulders were broad beneath a simple gray tunic. But his eyes were exactly what the stories described. Gray as storm clouds, gray as steel, gray as the ash left after a devastating fire. They fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into the mattress. The butcher of Blackmoor, the wolf who killed my father. Clara pushed herself upright, ignoring the scream of protest from her wounded shoulder. Her hand flew to her chest, searching for the knife that was no longer there. Of course it wasn't. They would have disarmed her, and finding instead the familiar weight of the Ashford crest. Still pinned to her ruined gown. They hadn't removed it. "You've been unconscious for 16 hours, Wulfric said. His voice was deep and measured, giving nothing away. "The healer says you lost significant blood. Another hour in the snow, and we would have found a corpse." So there had been others. Guards, perhaps. She had a vague memory of voices, of being lifted, of warmth wrapping around her like a blanket. But clearest of all was his voice, that first cold pronouncement. "What do we have here?" "Why—" Her throat was raw, her voice a ragged scrape. She swallowed and tried again. "Why am I still alive?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Nothing so warm as that. "An excellent question. One my advisors have been asking since I carried you across my threshold." He had carried her. Not his guards. The Alpha King himself had lifted her from the snow and brought her into his home. Clara didn't know what to do with that information, so she filed it away and focused on more immediate concerns. The hunters, my brother's wolves. They were gone. They retreated when they saw my patrol approaching. Something dark flickered in those gray eyes. They were wise to run. I'm not known for my mercy toward those who trespass on my territory. But you showed mercy to me. She didn't say it. Instead, she let her gaze travel over the room, cataloging details. The door was solid oak, probably barred from the outside. The windows were high and narrow, designed to let in light while preventing escape. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. "You know who I am," she said. It wasn't a question. The crest on her chest made that obvious. Clara Ashford. He rose from his chair and she saw how tall he was, easily a head taller than Marcus had been, his frame built for war. "Daughter of the wolf I killed 5 years ago on the Blackmoor fields. Sister to the current Ashford Alpha. And, according to the blood on your gown that isn't yours, recently widowed." He moved toward her, and Clara's wolf, her wolf, silent since Marcus's death, dormant and cold, suddenly stirred. No, not stirred. Surged. Heat erupted through her chest so violently she gasped, her hand flying to press against her sternum as if she could contain the sudden wildfire burning beneath her ribs. Her wolf, that familiar presence she'd lived with for over a decade, was suddenly more alive than it had ever been. Pressing forward, clawing toward the surface, filling her mind with a single word repeated over and over like a drumbeat, like a heartbeat, like a prayer. Him. 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 Wulfric stopped mid-stride. She watched it happen, watched his pupils blow wide, watched gold bleed into those storm-gray irises like sunrise cresting a mountain. His chest expanded with a sharp intake of breath, and a sound rumbled from his throat. Not words. Something more primal. A growl that resonated in Clara's bones and made her wolf howl in answer. Mate. The word crashed through her like a wave breaking against cliffs, reshaping everything it touched. She felt the bond snapping into place, a golden thread connecting her chest to his, pulling taut with a force that should have been impossible. The sensation defied everything she knew about her own body, her own soul. She was pregnant with another man's child. She was wearing the crest of his enemy. She had every reason in the world to fear him, to hate him, and her soul was screaming that this terrifying king was hers. "No," she whispered. That can't." His eyes were fully gold now, the predator looking out through them with an intensity that stole her breath. She could see him fighting for control, his hands clenching at his sides, the muscles in his jaw tight enough to crack stone. When he spoke, his voice had dropped an octave, rough with the effort of restraint. "Look at me." Her gaze locked with his. She couldn't have looked away if she'd wanted to, and some treacherous part of her didn't want to. The bond pulsed between them, warm and inexorable, and through it she felt echoes of what he was experiencing. Shock, recognition, a fierce protective want that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct. For a long, suspended moment, they simply stared at each other. Alpha king and enemy refugee, predator and prey, and somehow, impossibly mates. Then Wulfric closed his eyes and took a deliberate step back. "The healer will return within the hour," he said, his voice carefully controlled once more. "You need food and rest. The child needs you strong." The child. Marcus's child. The reminder hit Clara like cold water, and she felt her wolf whine in confusion. How could this be happening? How could the moon goddess be so cruel to give her a second mate when she was still carrying her first mate's baby? When she was trapped in enemy territory with no pack, no home, no future? She opened her mouth to demand answers, but Wulfric was already moving. Not toward her, but away. He crossed to the far side of the room and lifted his chair, carrying it to the wall farthest from the bed. When he sat again, there was nearly 20 feet between them. "You flinched," he said quietly. "When I approached, you expected me to hurt you." Clara hadn't realized she'd flinched. Her body had reacted on instinct, bracing for violence that hadn't come. "You killed my father." "Yes." No denial, no justification, just acknowledgement. "You could kill me just as easily." "I could." He leaned back in the chair, and something in his posture shifted. The predator was still there, still watching, but he'd deliberately made himself smaller, less threatening, giving her the entire room, the bed, the space to breathe. "But I won't. Not tonight. Not ever, if I can help it." Clara's fingers twisted in the silk sheets. She didn't understand him. She didn't understand any of this. "Rest," Wulfric said again. "No one will touch you here. You have my word." The word of the butcher of Blackmoor. The word of the man who had slaughtered her kin on the battlefield, who ruled a kingdom built on iron and blood. The word of her mate. Clara hated herself for believing him. She hated herself more for the small, traitorous part of her that was relieved. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under once more. When Clara woke again, the fire had been built back up, and the Alpha King was gone. In his place sat a small woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, arranging various jars and cloths on a bedside table that hadn't been there before. "Ah, you're awake. Good." The woman smiled, and Clara noticed the healer's mark tattooed on the inside of her wrist, the traditional symbol of those who served the moon goddess's gentler aspect. "I'm Marin. I've been tending your wounds. How do you feel?" "Confused," Clara admitted, her voice still rough. "Where is—" She stopped herself before she could finish the question. Why did it matter where Wulfric was? Why did her wolf strain toward the door as if it could sense him somewhere beyond it? "The king has business to attend to," Marin said gently. But he asked me to ensure you were cared for. He also asked me to tell you that you're not a prisoner. The door isn't locked. You're free to move about as you're able, though I'd recommend rest for at least another day. Not a prisoner. Clara didn't quite believe it, but she filed the information away regardless. The healer examined her shoulder with efficient, gentle hands, applying fresh salves that smelled of calendula and yarrow. Clara's wolf remained restless throughout, that new golden thread in her chest pulling insistently toward something she couldn't see. The child is well, Marin said softly, and Clara's attention snapped back to the present. I examined you while you slept. 3 months along, yes? The heartbeat is strong. Whatever you endured in your flight, the little one weathered it admirably. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the king. He's the one who found you. Carried you 3 miles through the snow himself rather than waiting for a litter. Said the child couldn't afford the delay. Marin's eyes were knowing, gentle. Whatever you may have heard about Wulfric Ironhold, my lady, he's not the monster the stories make him. Clara thought of gray eyes bleeding to gold, of a chair moved to the far wall because she'd flinched, of a voice saying, "No one will touch you here." She didn't know what to think anymore. By the 3rd day, Clara was well enough to leave her chambers. Marin had brought her simple clothing, a warm wool dress in dark green, sturdy boots, a thick cloak, and Clara had dressed with trembling hands, feeling more herself than she had since the wedding celebration turned to bloodshed. The corridors of Ironhold Keep were everything the stories described. Imposing stone walls hung with iron-wrought sconces, narrow windows that let in pale winter light, guards in black leather who watched her pass with unreadable expressions. Clara kept her chin high, the Ashford crest still pinned to her borrowed dress. If she was going to die here, she would do it with dignity. She found the great hall by instinct, following the thread in her chest until it led her to massive oak doors carved with wolves and thorns. Voices drifted through the crack between them, raised in argument sharp with anger. "Harboring an enemy spy!" someone was shouting. "She wears their crest openly. For all we know, this is an Ashford ploy to infiltrate—" "She was half dead in the snow," another voice cut in. "Some spy. Her brother commands the Ashford forces now, the same brother who killed her mate. You think she's loyal to him? I think she's an unknown quantity, and unknown quantities in wartime get people killed." Clara's hand found the door and pushed it open. The hall fell silent. It was a large space, dominated by a long table where perhaps 24 men and women sat, all of them turning to stare at her with varying degrees of suspicion, hostility, and in a few cases, curiosity. At the head of the table, in a chair that wasn't quite a throne but came close, sat Wulfric Ironhold. Their eyes met, and Clara felt that golden thread hum between them. His face revealed nothing, but his hands, she noticed, had tightened on the arms of his chair. Lady Ashford. The man who had been shouting, a heavy-set wolf with a gray beard and harder eyes, rose from his seat. "How convenient that you've arrived just as we discuss your fate. Perhaps you'd like to explain why we shouldn't throw you in a cell until this war with your brother is concluded?" Clara straightened her spine. "Because I'm not your enemy. My brother is." Pretty words, but you wear their crest. I wear my family's crest, the family my brother betrayed, the family whose rightful heir I carry. Her hand moved to her belly without conscious thought. Owen killed my mate. He killed my father. He would have killed me and my child if I hadn't run. I am no more his ally than you are. Murmurs rippled around the table. The gray-bearded wolf opened his mouth to argue further. And a snarl split the air. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the sound of absolute authority, of a power so vast it didn't require volume to make itself known. The windows rattled in their frames. Several wolves at the table bowed their heads involuntarily, submitting to the dominance rolling off their king in waves. Wulfric rose from his chair, and Clara saw for the first time what made him the Alpha King. It wasn't just his size or his strength, it was the sheer presence of him, the way the room seemed to shrink when he stood, the way every wolf in it instinctively oriented toward him like flowers toward the sun. "She carries an innocent life," he said, his voice low and lethal. "She wears wounds from fleeing her own blood. The child she carries is the legitimate Ashford heir, which makes her more valuable as an ally than anything your suspicion might protect." His gaze swept the table, and wolves who had commanded armies couldn't meet his eyes. "Question my judgment again. I dare you." No one spoke. Wulfric's attention turned to Clara, and something in his expression shifted. Not softening, exactly. She suspected this man didn't know how to soften, but something intentional, something meant to reassure. "Lady Ashford will be given quarters appropriate to her station. She will have freedom to move about the keep as she wishes. She will be accorded the respect due any guest under my protection." He paused, and when he continued, his voice had dropped to something that was almost gentle. "And she will have a guard at her door, not to keep her in." His eyes held hers, but to keep others out. The council dispersed in silence, their objections dying unvoiced beneath the weight of their king's command. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, watching them file past her with averted gazes, feeling the truth of her situation settle into her bones. She was in enemy territory. She was carrying her dead mate's child. And somehow, impossibly, the most dangerous wolf alive had just declared himself her protector. The bond in her chest hummed with approval, and Clara finally let herself acknowledge what she'd been trying to deny since the moment their eyes had first met. She was starting to believe him. The last of the council members slipped past Clara, their footsteps fading down the stone corridor until silence reclaimed the great hall. She stood rooted in the doorway, her hand still pressed protectively over her belly, watching Wulfric Ironhold dismiss his advisors with nothing more than the weight of his presence. He hadn't moved from where he stood at the head of the table, but his posture had shifted, the coiled tension in his shoulders easing by degrees now that his wolves had scattered. When he turned to face her fully, Clara caught something unguarded in his expression. Not the calculating Alpha King who had commanded a room full of warriors. Something rawer, something that made the bond between them pulse with answering warmth. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said, but there was no censure in his voice, only a weariness that surprised her. "The council isn't accustomed to being challenged." "I heard shouting." Clara stepped further into the hall, her borrowed slippers silent on the stone floor. Someone had brought her clothes while she slept. Simple but well made, in colors that didn't belong to any pack she recognized. Neutral. Safe. "I thought perhaps they were deciding whether to execute me." A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed his features. "If I wanted you dead, Lady Ashford, you wouldn't have woken in silk sheets with a healer at your bedside." "Then why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why protect me? I'm the daughter of the man who led armies against you. I wear the crest of a house that has hated yours for generations. My brother threatens war if you harbor me." She gestured helplessly at the empty chairs around the council table. "Your own advisors think I'm a liability at best, a spy at worst. So why?" Wulfric was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved, circling the table with a predator's liquid grace, and Clara had to fight the urge to retreat. He stopped several feet away from her, close enough that she could catch his scent, that combination of pine and winter wind that made her wolf strain toward him, but far enough that he wasn't crowding her. She realized with a start that he was being careful, intentional, giving her room to breathe. "Your father," he said finally, "was a worthy enemy. He fought with honor, even when the odds turned against him. When he fell on the Blackmoor fields, Wulfric's jaw tightened. It wasn't a victory I celebrated. It was a necessary ending to a war that had claimed too many lives on both sides. Clara's throat constricted. She remembered that day. Remembered waiting in the great hall for news, her mother already dead from the wasting sickness, Owen pacing by the fire with barely concealed eagerness. When the messenger came, when he spoke the words that shattered her world, Owen had smiled. Just for a moment. Just enough for Clara to see. "He spoke of you," Wulfric continued. "At the end, when it was clear neither of us would walk away without blood on our hands. He said his only regret was leaving his daughter to his son's mercy." Gray eyes met hers, and Clara felt the weight of understanding pass between them. "I didn't know what he meant then. I think I do now." The doors at the far end of the hall crashed open. Clara spun, her heart lurching into her throat, as a man in travel-stained clothing strode through flanked by two iron-hold guards. He was slight and sharp-featured, with pale hair pulled back from a face that radiated arrogance, and he wore a crest on his chest that Clara would recognize anywhere. The Silver Wolf of House Ashford. "Alpha King." The man swept into a bow that managed to be both deferential and mocking. "I bring greetings from Alpha Owen Ashford, rightful lord of the Northern Territories, who sends his regards and his demands." Wulfric hadn't moved, but something in the air had changed. The warmth Clara had glimpsed was gone, replaced by ice so cold it burned. An emissary. How civilized. "My lord believes in the proper forms." The man's eyes slid to Clara and his lip curled. "Even when dealing with those who would harbor criminals." Clara's nails bit into her palms. She knew this man. Edwin Marsh. He'd been a minor lord in her father's court, always hovering at the edges of power, always watching for opportunities. He'd transferred his loyalty to Owen within hours of her father's death. "Criminals," Wulfric repeated, his voice soft and deadly. "The Lady Clara Ashford is wanted for the murder of her husband, Lord Marcus Ashford." Edwin pulled a scroll from his belt and unfurled it with theatrical flourish. "She is also accused of conspiring against her rightful alpha, fleeing justice, and attempting to steal the Ashford heir for her own treasonous purposes." Clara's wolf snarled against her skin, and she felt her eyes burn with the effort of keeping her shift contained. "I didn't kill Marcus. Owen did. I watched him tear out my husband's throat at our wedding feast." "A pretty story." Edwin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Unfortunately, we have witnesses who tell a different tale. Witnesses who saw you standing over your mate's body, covered in his blood." "Because I was trying to save him." Clara's voice cracked. "Because I held him while he died, while my brother walked away with blood on his claws and triumph on his face." "Enough." Wulfric's command cut through the hall like a blade. Edwin paled, his smugness faltering. "You've delivered your accusations. What does Owen want?" Edwin swallowed hard, but he rallied. "Alpha Ashford demands the return of the traitor Clara within 7 days. He also requires that any child she carries be surrendered to Ashford custody, as the heir belongs to the pack, not to a murderer." The word surrender echoed through Clara's mind. She thought of her baby, barely formed but already so fiercely loved, being torn from her arms and given to Owen. Given to the man who had already destroyed everything else she cared about. Her hand pressed harder against her belly, and her wolf howled with protective fury. "And if I refuse?" Wulfric asked, almost conversationally. "Then Alpha Ashford, along with his allies from the Stone River, Black Hollow, and Winter's Edge packs, will consider this an act of war." Edwin's confidence returned, bolstered by the magnitude of the threat he carried. 4 packs against 1, Alpha King. Even you cannot stand against such numbers." Silence stretched through the hall. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Owen had done it. He had built an alliance against Ironhold, and he was using her as the excuse. Whether Wulfric surrendered her or fought for her, Owen won. Either she died, or Wulfric's kingdom burned. When Wulfric spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "You will return to your master and tell him this." He stepped forward, and Edwin stumbled back despite himself. "The Lady Clara is under my protection. Her child is under my protection. If Owen Ashford wants them, he is welcome to come and take them himself, though I suggest he bring more than 4 packs, because the last wolf who threatened someone under my care didn't live long enough to regret it." Edwin's face had gone the color of old snow. "You would start a war over an enemy's daughter?" Wulfric smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "I would end one." The emissary fled. There was no other word for the way he gathered his dignity and practically ran for the doors, the Ironhold guards following at a measured pace. Clara watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs, and when the doors finally closed behind him, she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "He'll tell Owen everything." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant. "That you refused, that you threatened him. Owen will come with his alliance and people will die because of me. People die in wars whether you're involved or not." Wulfric turned to face her, and Clara was struck again by the impossible gray of his eyes, like storms, like steel, like smoke rising from ash. "Your brother wants power. He would have found another excuse to move against me eventually. You've simply given him a convenient one." "Convenient?" Clara laughed, the sound brittle. "Is that what I am? A convenient excuse for war?" Something shifted in Wulfric's expression. He moved toward her, slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. And when she didn't, he stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This near, she could see the flecks of darker gray in his irises, could feel the heat radiating from his skin despite the winter chill that permeated the stone hall. "You are many things, Clara Ashford," he said quietly. "Convenient is not among them." Her wolf pressed forward, straining toward him with an intensity that left her breathless. She wanted to step back, to maintain the distance that kept her safe, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The bond between them had settled into a low, constant hum, and standing this close to him felt like standing beside a fire after years of cold. "The child isn't yours," she whispered, because it needed to be said, because he needed to understand. "The child is Marcus's, my dead mate's. I carry another wolf's heir, and I can't, pretend otherwise." "I know." "Then you know that whatever this is between us," she gestured vaguely at the space between their bodies, at the invisible thread that pulled them together. "It's impossible. It's wrong. I should be mourning my mate, not standing here feeling—" She broke off, unable to finish the sentence. Wulfric reached out, moving slowly enough that she could have stopped him, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The brush of his fingers against her skin sent heat cascading through her veins, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. "You feel guilty," he said, not a question. "Because your wolf recognizes me, because your body responds to me, because some part of you wants this even though your mind insists it's betrayal." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Yes. Your mate is dead." The words were blunt, but his voice was gentle. "Mourning him honors his memory. But punishing yourself for surviving? For the bond you didn't choose? That helps no one." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and Clara shivered. "The child you carry will need a mother who hasn't destroyed herself with guilt, and I—" He stopped, drew his hand back. Something raw and wanting flickered across his features before he locked it away behind the mask of the Alpha King. "I will not push you," he said finally. "I will not claim you or touch you beyond what you allow. You have enough enemies, Clara. I won't be another one." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the great hall with her heart pounding and her wolf keening with loss. She watched him go, this man who should have been her enemy, who had every reason to use her and none to protect her. And she felt something in her chest crack open. Not break, not shatter, just open. Like a door she'd kept locked for years, finally swinging free. The next 3 days passed in a blur of small kindnesses that Clara didn't know how to process. Wulfric didn't seek her out. He gave her space, exactly as he'd promised, but his presence was everywhere nonetheless. In the guard who appeared each morning with fresh bread and honeyed tea. In the way servants addressed her as "my lady" without prompting. In the warm clothes that materialized in her wardrobe, sized to accommodate her growing belly. On the 4th morning, she woke to find a book on her bedside table. A collection of northern folk tales, its spine cracked from use, with a note tucked inside in bold, slashing handwriting. "These were my mother's favorites. I thought you might want something to read to the child." Clara held the book to her chest and wept. She was still crying when a servant burst through the door, white-faced with terror. "My lady." The girl could barely get the words out. "The emissary. He never left. He's been hiding in the servants' quarters and he's done something to the wine. The wine for tonight's council dinner." Clara's blood turned to ice. "What kind of something?" "Poison." The girl's voice broke. "Wolfsbane and silver root, enough to kill everyone at the table." Clara was running before the girl finished speaking. The great hall erupted into chaos the moment Clara burst through the doors. She saw everything at once. The long table set for council, the goblets of dark wine already poured, and Wulfric rising from his chair with a cup halfway to his lips. Edwin Marsh stood in the shadows near the servants' entrance, his pale hair gleaming in the torchlight, a small vial still clutched in his trembling fingers. "Don't drink it!" Clara's scream tore through the hall, raw and desperate. Wulfric's hand froze. His gray eyes found hers across the room, and in that instant, she saw understanding flash through them. He dropped the goblet. Wine splashed across the table, dark as old blood, and where it touched the white linen, the fabric began to smoke and blacken. "Seize him," Wulfric commanded, his voice cutting through the sudden uproar like a blade. But Edwin was already moving. He grabbed a serving girl, pressing a knife to her throat, backing toward the door with wild eyes. The guards hesitated, unwilling to risk the girl's life, and Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the scene unfold. "Owen sends his regards," Edwin spat, his earlier meekness replaced by fanatical conviction. "You should have surrendered the traitor when you had the chance. Now your entire council would have died choking on their own blood, and your precious kingdom would have fallen into chaos." "Would have." Wulfric moved with a predator's liquid grace, circling slowly, drawing Edwin's attention away from Clara. "Past tense. Your plan has failed." "Has it?" Edwin's smile was terrible. "Look outside, Alpha King. Look at the horizon." Clara didn't need to look. She could feel it. A distant rumble beneath her feet. The vibration of hundreds of wolves running across frozen ground. Owen's alliance. They had been waiting, she realized. Waiting for the poison to do its work. For Ironhold's leadership to fall before the army arrived. "He's here," she whispered. "Owen is here." Wulfric's eyes met hers again, and in them she saw no fear. Only a fierce, burning determination that made her wolf surge forward with answering fire. "Then we meet him on the field. But first..." He moved so fast that Clara barely tracked it. One moment he was 10 feet from Edwin. The next, the knife was clattering to the ground and the emissary was crumpling with Wulfric's hand around his throat. The serving girl stumbled away, sobbing, and Clara caught her, steadying her with hands that barely trembled. "You will watch," Wulfric said to Edwin, his voice terrible in its softness. "You will watch your master fall, and then you will tell whoever remains of his alliance what happens to those who threaten what is mine." He threw Edwin to the guards and turned to Clara. For a heartbeat, the chaos around them fell away, and there was only the bond humming between them, bright and fierce and undeniable. "Stay here," he said. "Stay safe." Clara lifted her chin. No. Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration. "Clara, he murdered my mate." Her voice didn't waver. "He killed my father. He hunted me through the snow like an animal, and he has spent my entire life taking everything I love." She stepped closer, and her wolf pressed against her skin, not with fear, but with righteous fury. "I will not hide in a castle while others fight my battles. I am Clara Ashford, and I will face my brother." For a long moment, Wulfric simply looked at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Together, then." The word settled in her chest like a promise. The battlefield spread before them in the gray dawn light. A frozen expanse where two forces faced each other across trampled snow. Owen's alliance had brought hundreds of wolves. Clara could see the banners of Stone River, Black Hollow, and Winter's Edge flying alongside the Silver Wolf of Ashford. Her brother's forces outnumbered Ironhold's by nearly 2-1. But numbers weren't everything. The Ironhold wolves stood in disciplined ranks, their alpha king at their head, and the power that radiated from Wulfric was enough to make even the enemy wolves shift uneasily. This was not a soft southern lord or a minor pack alpha. This was the Butcher of Blackmoor, the king who had never lost a battle, and his presence alone seemed to push back the winter cold. Owen rode at the front of his army, mounted on a massive black horse, his armor gleaming with silver inlay. When he saw Clara standing at Wulfric's side, his face twisted with something between rage and amusement. "Sister!" His voice carried across the field, magnified by the stillness of the morning air. "How touching. You found yourself another protector. Tell me, did you spread your legs for this one too? Or did you simply offer him the Ashford territories that are rightfully mine?" Clara's hands curled into fists, but she held her ground. "You speak of rights? You, who murdered your own alpha? Who killed our father in his own hall?" Father was weak. Owen's smile was the same one she remembered from childhood, cold and calculating. "He would have handed everything to you through that pathetic husband of yours. I simply took what should have been mine from the start." "Marcus was twice the wolf you will ever be." "Marcus is dead." Owen's voice hardened. "As you should be. As you will be, once I've finished with your new pet king." He turned his attention to Wulfric, his lip curling with contempt. "Surrender her, Ironhold. Surrender her, and the child she carries, and perhaps I'll let you keep a small portion of your territory. Fight me, and I will burn everything you love to ash." Wulfric's response was a laugh, low, dangerous, utterly devoid of humor. "You brought 4 packs against me, and you think that's enough? Your father tried the same thing at Blackmoor. You remember how that ended." Owen's face darkened, and Clara saw the old hatred rise in his eyes. "My father was a fool who thought honor mattered in war. I harbor no such delusions." He raised his hand, and his army began to advance. The battle that followed was brutal and swift. Clara watched from the rise where Wulfric had positioned her, surrounded by guards, as the two forces collided in a chaos of snarling wolves and flashing steel. She could see Wulfric at the center of it all, his wolf form massive and gray as storm clouds, cutting through enemy ranks like a force of nature. But her eyes kept returning to Owen. Her brother fought on horseback, directing his forces while staying clear of the worst of the fighting, just as he always had. Just as their father had warned her years ago, when he'd first noticed Owen's cowardice hiding behind his cruelty, and then she saw it. Owen's forces were breaking. Stone River's wolves were retreating, their alpha dead on the field. Black Hollow had turned and fled entirely. Winter's Edge fought on, but they were surrounded, and one by one, their warriors fell or surrendered. Owen saw it too. Clara watched her brother's face twist with rage as his grand alliance crumbled around him. He wheeled his horse, his gaze sweeping the battlefield, and then it landed on her. Even from this distance, she could see the calculation in his eyes, the cold, desperate mathematics of a man who knew he had lost and was searching for any way to salvage victory from defeat. He spurred his horse forward, toward her. The guards moved to intercept him, but Owen was fast, faster than she remembered, and his sword cut through the first man before anyone could react. Clara stumbled backward, her hand going instinctively to her belly, to the child who represented everything Owen wanted to destroy. "You should have died in the snow," Owen snarled, swinging down from his horse. His eyes were wild now, stripped of all pretense. "You should have bled out with our father's corpse, but you've always been too stubborn to know when you're beaten." Clara's back hit a tree, nowhere to run. Owen's sword rose, and Clara Ashford made a choice. She didn't scream for help. She didn't cower or beg. Instead, she reached into the rage that had been building since the night Marcus died, since the moment she'd watched her brother destroy everything she loved, and she let it consume her. "I am not beaten," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "I was never beaten. I survived your hunters. I crossed into enemy territory with an arrow in my shoulder. I found allies where you swore I had only enemies." She stepped forward, and Owen actually faltered, surprise flickering across his face. "You spent our whole lives telling me I was weak, that I was nothing. But here I stand, brother, while your army breaks around you. Here I stand, carrying the legitimate Ashford heir, while you've destroyed every alliance you ever built with your cruelty and your greed. You!" Owen raised his sword again, but before he could strike, a massive gray wolf slammed into him from the side. Wulfric. He had crossed the entire battlefield in moments, driven by the bond that connected them, by the primal need to protect his mate. Now he stood over Owen's crumpled form, his jaws dripping with blood, his eyes burning with golden fire. Owen scrambled backward, his sword lost somewhere in the snow. "Mercy," he gasped. "I yield, I yield." Wulfric's growl was thunder rolling through mountains. He shifted, rising to his full height, and Clara saw the terrible beauty of his rage, controlled, focused, deadly. "You murdered her mate," Wulfric said softly. "You killed her father. You hunted her through the snow and tried to murder her child. And now you beg for mercy?" "She's my sister," Owen's voice cracked. "She's my blood." Clara walked forward. Her legs were steady. Her hands were steady. Everything was steady, because she had finally found the one thing Owen had never been able to take from her, herself. "I am your sister," she agreed. "I remember every cruel word, every stolen toy, every time you told me that everything I loved would be yours. I remember Father trying to make peace between us, and you spitting in his face. I remember Marcus's blood on my wedding gown." She stopped in front of him, looking down at the brother who had haunted her nightmares for as long as she could remember. "I could show you mercy," she said. "I could be better than you, kinder than you, more honorable than you." She paused. "But you killed my mate. You killed our father. And you would have killed my child if given the chance." She turned to Wulfric. His gray eyes met hers, waiting, asking. "For Marcus," Clara said quietly. "For my child. For everyone you betrayed." She gave the nod. Owen's last word was her name, choked off as Wulfric's claws found his throat. Clara watched her brother die with her chin high and her heart finally free. The Ironhold soldiers cheered. Across the field, the last of Owen's alliance threw down their weapons and surrendered. Clara barely heard any of it. She was looking at Wulfric, at the blood on his hands, at the fierce protectiveness still burning in his eyes. "It's over," she whispered. He crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her cheek. "It's over," he agreed. "You're safe. The child is safe." His arms tightened around her. "Clara." She pulled back to look at him. The sun was rising behind them, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose, and his gray eyes had softened into something warm, something wanting. "You killed my father," she said. "Yes." "He died on your sword at Blackmoor." "Yes." No excuses. No justifications. Just truth. Clara reached up and touched his face. His jaw tightened beneath her fingers, and she felt the tremor that ran through him. "I should hate you for that," she said. "Some part of me probably always will. But he was a warrior, and he died in battle. And you," her voice caught, "you've shown me more kindness in these few days than Owen showed me in a lifetime. You protected me when you had every reason to use me. You fought for my child when it would have been easier to surrender us both." "I would never." "I know." She rose on her toes, bringing her face close to his. "I know you wouldn't. That's why I'm still standing here. That's why my wolf howls for you every moment we're apart. That's why—" She drew a shaking breath. "That's why I'm done fighting this. Fighting us." Wulfric went absolutely still. "Clara, the child, is Marcus's," she agreed, "and will always be Marcus's, but I am alive. I am here. And I choose you, Wulfric Ironhold. Not because the bond demands it, because you are worth choosing." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then his hands came up to cup her face, trembling with barely contained emotion. "You're certain?" "Yes. Because once I mark you, once you mark me, there is no going back. You will be my Luna, my queen, my mate in every way that matters." Clara smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she'd worn since before Marcus died. "I know what I'm choosing. Do you?" His answer was to kiss her. It was not gentle. It was not careful. It was acclaiming, fierce and desperate and hungry, years of loneliness and loss pouring through the contact. Clara gasped against his mouth and kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wulfric rested his forehead against hers. "Not here," he murmured. "Not on a battlefield. You deserve better than that." He swept her into his arms and carried her back to Ironhold. The chamber was warm with firelight, the rest of the castle quiet in the aftermath of victory. Clara stood by the window, watching the last of the sunset fade from the sky, and when Wulfric's hand settled on her shoulders, she leaned back into his warmth. "We don't have to do this tonight," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "We can wait. There's no rush." "I've spent too long waiting." She turned in his arms, tilting her face up to his. "Too long being afraid. I'm tired of fear, Wulfric. I want to feel something else." His eyes darkened. "What do you want to feel?" "Yours." He kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. His hand slid down her arms, leaving trails of heat in their wake, and Clara shivered. "I need to hear you say it," he whispered against her lips. "I need to know you want this. All of it. I want you to mark me." Her voice was steady. "Certain. And I want to mark you. I want the bond complete. I want—" She paused, searching for the words. "I want to belong somewhere again. To someone." He growled, low and possessive, and the sound sent warmth flooding through her entire body. In one smooth motion, he lifted her and carried her to the bed. The claiming was everything Clara had imagined, and nothing she could have prepared for. Wulfric kissed her throat first, gentle and worshipful, his lips tracing the curve of her neck, while his hands mapped her body like territory he was finally being allowed to explore. Clara arched into him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, and when his mouth reached the junction of her neck and shoulder, She felt his teeth graze her skin. Now, she breathed. Please. He bit. The pain was sharp and bright, a lightning strike that made her cry out, but before she could draw her next breath, it transformed. Heat erupted from the wound, spreading through her veins like liquid fire, and Clara felt the bond between them explode open. Suddenly she could feel him, not just his body pressed against hers, but his emotions, his thoughts, the fierce protective love that had been building since the moment he found her in the snow. Mine, his wolf growled through the bond. Mine. Finally, mine. Yours, her wolf answered, and the word carried the weight of everything she felt. But it wasn't complete. Not yet. Clara pulled him up, reversing their positions until she straddled him, until his throat was exposed beneath her mouth. Wulfric's eyes went wide with surprise, then soft with wonder. Clara! My turn, she said, and sank her teeth into his neck. The bond sang. That was the only word for it, a chorus of light and warmth and belonging that resonated through every cell of her body. She felt his gasp, felt the shudder that ran through him, felt the moment he surrendered completely to her claim. Yours, he breathed, his hands fisting in her hair. Yours, always. She lifted her head, her lips stained with his blood, and met his eyes. In them, she saw everything she needed, not just desire, not just the bond, but genuine love, the kind of love she had thought she would never find again. Mate, she whispered. Mate, he agreed, and pulled her down into another kiss. Later, wrapped in his arms with the bond humming peacefully between them, Clara pressed her hand against her belly. She'll have 2 fathers, she said quietly. Marcus gave her life, and you will give her a home. Wulfric's hand covered hers, warm and protective. She'll know about him, about who he was, what he sacrificed. She'll grow up knowing she was loved before she was even born. Clara's eyes burned with grateful tears. Thank you. You never need to thank me for loving you. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Or for loving her. Spring came to Ironhold in a riot of color, snow melting to reveal fields of wildflowers that stretched as far as the eye could see. Clara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose, and felt the new life within her stir. The coronation had been 3 months ago, a ceremony that united the Ashford territories with Ironhold under a single banner. The Silver Wolf and the Iron Crown joined at last. The war was truly over. The alliance that Owen had built had scattered, its leaders dead or imprisoned, and for the first time in generations, the Northern Territories knew peace. Wulfric's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Through the bond, she felt his contentment, his pride, his overwhelming love. She's kicking again, Clara said, guiding his hand to her swollen belly. He laughed, a sound of pure joy that still caught her off guard sometimes. The butcher of Blackmore, laughing like a child at the flutter of tiny feet. Strong already, he murmured, like her mother. And stubborn, definitely like her mother. They stood together as the sun rose fully, bathing the kingdom in light. In a few months their daughter would arrive, the heir to both houses, the symbol of a new beginning. Clara would raise her to be kind and fierce, to know both the history she came from and the future she could build. And she would tell her about Marcus, about the gentle man who had loved her mother, who had protected her with his last breath, who had given them both the chance to survive. Marin appeared in the doorway, the healer's kind face creased with a smile. The council is gathering, my lady. They're eager to hear the Luna Queen's opinion on the trade agreements. Clara smiled. Tell them I'll be there shortly. When Marin withdrew, Wulfric pressed a kiss to Clara's temple. You could make them wait longer. You are the queen. I could. She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. But they've waited long enough for peace. So have I. She walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at her mate. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the laugh lines at the corners of his gray eyes. He looked nothing like the monster from the stories. He looked like home. "I love you," she said. The words came easily now, without fear or guilt. Just truth. His smile was everything. "I love you too, both of you." Clara pressed her hand to her heart, to the place where the bond lived, and felt it pulse with warmth and belonging. Then she went to build her kingdom.